I'm Megan, and thank you for joining me on my newly named channel, Body with MM. And I really feel like this is a terrific video to introduce my new name, because this video is not only about the multifidus, maybe that's what hooked you to come here, or that you have back pain, but it's about the four deep core as a whole. And know that I listen to you. Thank you for your sponsorships, your donations, but also for your comments, because this video is a direct result of a comment that I received from Paul. He asked me if I had a somatic yoga video that had to do with the multifidus. So here it is, Paul. But there's a little caveat to that, because I don't believe in working with muscles in isolation, or this reductionist theory of taking a muscle out and you can just do this and show what it does. Because we are about flow and movement in a way that's very organic and lively and free. So having said that, if you know about the multifidus and you just want the movement, please skip ahead, go to it. Otherwise, I'm going to explain a little bit about the multifidus and the four deep core muscles. So you can look up at the sheet for a moment. So if you imagine your torso like a house, so this is all about postural tone, this house has to have a roof. And you can take your hands and just gently put them around the lower rib cage. Think of a dome-shaped muscle, or sometimes I imagine like a jellyfish moving. And this is your diaphragm. And if you begin to breathe to the area in the center of your torso at your low ribs, you'll know right away whether or not your diaphragm is responding, because your diaphragm is one of the four deep core muscles, is very accessible through respiration, since it is the engine of your breathing. So that's the roof of your house. And then we all need a really strong foundation. So you can take your awareness or your hands down to the base of your spine. And this is where I use very formal words such as pee-pee and poo-poo, and also your sits bones. So between those four areas, there's a diamond shape, and this is your pelvic floor. If you're not familiar with pelvic floor, please know that I have a specific video list on pelvic floor to help activate the pelvic floor muscles. Go to that. Otherwise, we'll do a short understanding of moving pelvic floor in this video. And then next we go to our walls. The front body, we have at the lower area, that one of the four deep cores is the transversus abdominis, and it's right around the navel center to the pubis and wraps all the way around your hips, almost like a corset of muscles. So super important in stabilizing not only the hips and the pelvis, but the low back. Then we go into the back wall itself. Here's where we find multifidus, or the plural form, multifidi. Because really what they are is it's two sets of muscles that run on either side of the spine, very deep to the middle of your body, to all the way in there, and they're segmented. So the multifidus, their main job is to hold you upright, to stabilize you, but they also have the ability to allow you to make small movements. So really to isolate certain areas of the spine. So if we take a moment to side bend over to the left, and just take a few little bends over to the left, so a lateral bend. What's happening there is the multifidus on the left side will shorten or contract to allow the side bend. And let's go ahead and take a little side bend to the right. You could do this seated or lying down. And that's your multifidus on the right side should be shortening if they're turned on correctly. Multifidus also helps us to rotate. So as we rotate to the left, the multifidus on the right side will actually contract or shorten. And as we rotate to the right, just the opposite. So you can just take a few rotations. Hopefully you're moving with me right now. So back to the understanding of the four deep core muscles. The four deep core are what we call postural muscles, again having to do with postural tone. So postural muscles are about anticipating movement. They're really more involuntary because they're so deep. They're deep beyond our subconscious awareness. Versus if we take an understanding of what fast twitch or movement muscles are about, take your arm in front of you and just bend your elbow a few times. So as we do that and hold your upper arm, you'll notice that your bicep will shorten and the tricep will lengthen. So these muscles can be turned on and off at will. These are the muscles of movement, the fast twitch. But these four deep core are the slow twitch muscles. So really the best way I've found to activate or wake them up when they're inhibited, which means they're taking a long vacation, is through somatic movement. Back to that word inhibited. So Paul's comment, I would assume, about the multifidus came from the fact that what they've seen in studies is that when somebody has low back pain or an injury, the multifidus on the side of the injury will become inhibited. In other words, they're not turning on. So understand that inhibition in muscles is not lack of strength. It's certainly not lack of flexibility. It's a communication problem. What is somatics? Somatics is about re-educating the muscles from the brain. So it really works well to wake up these deep core muscles so that we have that flow, that feeling of natural posture, that we're not forcing the shoulders back or the head back. It's something very intuitive deep inside of us. But it's not always there if we've had injury or disease or even things like depression. So we're going to get started lying down. You will need a block or a pillow or a ball, anything that you can rest on. And we're going to come down, so we're going to start with the diaphragm. We have to address all of these muscles as they function together. So bend your knees. We're coming into constructive rest. Place your feet about underneath the knees with the feet as wide as your hips. First, just notice yourself breathing and take a few breaths in and out of your mouth. And place your hands on your chest. And ask yourself, is it your chest that's moving? Are you able to breathe through your mouth and get your breath to move your rib cage or your abdomen? Or is that a struggle? One of the first things we learn in keeping the deep core active and flowing is to breathe in and out the nose. And if that's new for you, you can try breathing in the nose and out the mouth. But notice what happens when you switch your breath to using the nose as the gateway. Now place your hands down on your rib cage, just right around. Imagine you have an inner tube on. And you can even take the heels of the hands and slightly press them into your rib cage. So as you breathe in, sense the way that the ribs can go outward on the sides and upward in the front and downward into the ground in the back. So what I'm asking you to do right now is to really take the diaphragm into full activation. Moving your breath, your body from your diaphragm. What we often hear in yoga is belly breath. And something I really want to distinguish is that belly breath is just breathing to the belly. Diaphragmatic breathing is the belly, the ribs, the chest, everything. So the diaphragmatic breathing is all we need to get the diaphragm functioning as part of that four deep core. And as you breathe into this area in the center of your body, and notice if it's hard to do, if only your belly's moving or only your chest is moving, we start here. This is the first part of the function, the roof of your house. And you can locate and land as you're here. Let all of the parts of your body as you breathe out just release into the ground underneath you. Locate those areas that are being supported by the ground. And as you breathe in, just land in your body, whatever part of your body your mind takes you to. Perhaps it is this newborn feeling of freedom of breathing to the diaphragm. Then I'm going to ask you to switch your awareness all the way down to the base of the spine. Remember that area of the diamond shape of the pelvic floor. Continue to breathe through diaphragm and just notice if you feel any movement in the area of the pelvic floor. Again, if this is new for you, I have videos specifically for pelvic floor. I have a whole playlist. But you're just noticing what's happening intuitively without changing anything or without voluntarily moving muscles. So when the muscles are functioning correctly in this postural space, what we should feel is a slight bit of stretching in the pelvic floor as we breathe in, and a little bit of a contraction or upward and inward movement as we breathe out. What you can picture as you're breathing in, the diaphragm itself is contracting, so it's compressing down into the abdomen. So all those abdominal organs are pushing into your pelvic floor, which stresses your pelvic floor. It stretches it out. So it's getting bigger and spreading out as you breathe in. And then you release the breath out. The diaphragm relaxes, slides back under the rib cage, releases the pressure on the abdominal area. So we call that inner abdominal pressure. And then the pelvic floor actually will draw back in towards the center of the spine. So just a short bit of awareness on diaphragm and pelvic floor, the roof and the foundation of your postural muscles, your 4 deep core. And we simply do this by breathing fully to the diaphragm and letting our awareness float down to the base of the spine, to the pelvic floor. So let's say that the pelvic floor is not functioning, we're not feeling movement down there. For today's video, I'm just going to give you one short option to help feel it, and if this doesn't work, we have several others. But you're going to need some blocks or some books or something to put your hands on. I have to reach over my snoring dog here. Put the blocks about underneath your shoulders. Your hands are going to go on them, or books. Books work fine too. Stop the video. Take a big breath in like you've been doing through the diaphragm, and a breath out. And I find it's important to find pelvic floor seated too, because really when we want it to function, we're not lying down, we're moving, we're standing, right? And then notice as you're breathing out, do you feel any lifting of the pelvic floor up towards the center? And we'll see if we can help that along a little bit. So you can press into your hands, take a breath in all the way from the navel center to the throat. And then you're going to take a breath out all the way from the throat to the navel center, almost like you're gently squeezing out that last little breath in the abdomen. And as you do that, push into your hands as if you're going to lift your sit bones up off the ground. And you are. If you don't feel it with your legs extended, sometimes it's easier to access with your legs crossed. So we breathe in and we breathe out, push down, lift the butt off the floor, and see if that helps you to feel that upward and inward lifting of the pelvic floor on the exhale. Inhale, release pelvic floor towards the ground. Exhale, lift. So the other thing is this is going to get us moving towards that next of the 4 deep core, the transversus abdominis, because I call the pelvic floor and the transverse, I'm just going to say TVAs, they're like the twins. They work together. So on inhalation, abdomen, transversus abdominis, pelvic floor stretching, and on exhalation, they're drawing in, contracting, compressing, whatever you want to call it. So just see if you have that natural awareness. So we want to wake that up next. And then we're going to go back down to the ground. We'll do another movement that will help to familiarize ourselves with pelvic floor as well as the TAs or TVAs down here, back onto the ground in constructive rest. Place your hands like a diamond shape so that we call these the ASIS points. You can feel your hip points and come just inside of those in a diamond shape. You can kind of palpate the area slightly inward and downward. And then as you're breathing out, I just want you to gently press low back and low ribs into the floor and draw in through the abdomen. So we're creating what later on I'm going to call dog till, but it's a posterior tilt of the pelvis. The pelvis is tilting back. And sometimes we need that movement of the pelvis to begin to engage pelvic floor and the TAs more. Ultimately, we should be able to do it with the spine in a neutral position, so not having to tilt. But let's give ourselves a little bit of a break and exhale, press low back, low ribs down. Imagine drawing, it's like a cinch sack, drawing the pelvic floor up and in, and the area from the pubis to the belly button and the two hip bones, those two bones you can feel. And notice if you're feeling some tightening right in that area. Inhale, release. Really important to let that pelvic floor stretch out. By the way, again, pelvic floor series, understand that pelvic floor can be like any other muscle, it can get tight and stay there. We call that hypertonic pelvic floor. That's a no-go too. So we want to feel it stretch on the inhale and compress or contract on the exhale, just like the TAs. Notice now we've gone into 3 of the 4 deep core muscles because we're now in the diaphragm, pelvic floor, and TAs. And all we're doing is exhaling. We sometimes call this the tilt of the pelvis, or it goes by so many names, arch and curl. So we could actually arch the back if we wanted and curl. But if you're starting to feel that drawing in and up on the exhale, what I encourage you to do, see if you can keep your pelvis still and create that same contraction without having to lift the tailbone or press down. So can you exhale and draw up through pelvic floor and transverse abdominis without having to change the shape of the pelvis? Take a few and see how that feels. So again, if these things aren't happening for you, we're going to do a couple other tricks next, but you can always refer to, I have videos that are all about waking up the core. I'll put that up there for you. Keep working on that, because really in working with the 4 deep core, I feel that the multifidus as the back wall is the last one we go to. Unfortunately, it's the first one you probably want to go to if you have back pain, but we have to get all of this other stuff working, the other 3. So take your time. We're going to roll over and we're going to come to all fours. So in all fours, you want to spread your fingers and take your thumb and index finger as wide as your outer shoulders. We want to have a nice sturdy platform with our arms. If, by the way, your wrist just won't do this, you can either make a fist or you can come onto forearms, though I prefer you to be on hands, but you can try forearms. So otherwise you're pressing into the ground. And what we want to do now is really feel where the spine is truly in a neutral position, because that's where we most can access the multifidus. So to feel what's neutral, let's feel what's not neutral. So I'm going to have you take a big breath in. Imagine filling your front body as you breathe in, so all the way from the pubis to the throat. And as you do that, sometimes we call this the cow pose. I actually am going to call it the chicken butt. We're going to lift our chicken butt strut. We're going to lift the tail feathers up and then release. Because what I want you to do is to feel the way you're arching your low back or shortening your low back, and how your pelvis is tilting forward and down. So we call that an anterior tilt. We want to familiarize what it feels like to be in an anterior tilt. And the other thing that can often happen, and this is a fault of the multifidus not working, is we collapse the shoulder blades. And maybe it's not the fault, but it's not working. So I am feeling as if my front body is filling on the inhale at the expense of the back body completely collapsing. I also call this one banana back. And then just releasing to your neutral position. So do that a few times so you can familiarize yourself. What does it feel like to be in that chicken butt? And inhale. And then if you want to sit back, you can sit on your knees, whatever position feels best for you. Take your hands to your hips and see if you can create that same chicken butt in a seated position. If this isn't comfortable, I'm not going to do it because the video, you can stand up and do it too. So I want you to create that anterior tilt standing, or at least stacking the shoulders over the hips and the diaphragm in the center. And notice how when we go into that, the diaphragm shoots forward. The four deep core, they talk to one another, so they like to land and locate one with the other. So when we stick that rib cage out, it's just not reading us right. So we're just getting familiar. And in yoga, of course, we call this a back bend. It's extension of the spine. And we're just feeling that. Probably feels good to stretch the front body though, right? And you might be doing it standing. Please go ahead, do it standing. Do it any way you want. Do it when you're standing at your kitchen sink. It's all about freedom of movement. But let's go the other way now. So we're going to come back to all fours. Spread your fingers, knees underneath the hips. And now I want you to again take an inhale. So this is where we stray away from the yoga. I call this the somatic cat-cow. You're going to inhale and think of lifting or filling your back body with your breath. So think of filling your kidneys, your back ribs and backs of the lungs. And then exhale. Just release and notice how gravity will take you back down. So we're now coming into what we call a forward fold in yoga, or flexion of the spine. But notice it from your pelvis. So your pelvis is tilting up and back, so we call that a posterior tilt of the pelvis. You're also spreading your shoulder blades away from your spine as you fill your back. I really like to acknowledge our backside too, I should say, because it's our place of protection. Right? Your rib cage in the back there protecting all of your organs. We call it the shadow side in energy work. Fill it up. Fill your kidneys. Think of your adrenal glands in the backside. And notice what it feels like to curl that tailbone under. I'll call that dog tail. If a dog gets in trouble, right, it tucks its tail under. What does that feel like? And then either standing or seated. Stand up if that's more comfortable. I can sit with my shins underneath me. You don't have to. Or the other way to do this, by the way, if you really want to sit, is to put one or two blocks underneath you, especially if your knees are grumping at you. You can do that. All right, so you can sit on the blocks. But let's see if we can find that dog tail now. On an inhalation, you're going to fill your back body and tilt back. If you're a yogi, it's going to feel backwards for you. Don't care. I want you to fill your back body. So what I find with somatics is that a lot of times to learn what we want to do, or to free up the body to let it do what it does naturally, we have to find out what it feels like to do what we don't want to do. So that's what this is about. Is we don't want to be in this posterior tilt. So what does that feel like? Notice how the muscles, all the muscles in the front side are shortening, right? We might sit like this a lot. All those anterior muscles are shortening. The back body is lengthening. And if we sit like this all day, it's not so good for respiration, for the organs. So we start to recognize these positions. But the other side is we should be able to move in and out of it, right? This is our first, most primitive position. We call it fetal curl. We all started from that position. So there it is. Now let's come back to all fours again. So if you're standing, please join me. So now we know that we don't want to be in that chicken butt. we also don't want to be in the trouble dog tuck tail position. Somewhere in between is your neutral spine, and that's what we're looking for. Is the pelvis isn't falling towards the ground, which I see a lot. It's also not tucking. This big one in the yoga world is that people say tuck your tailbone, tuck your tailbone. Well, fortunately, that's finally getting thrown out. We don't want to tuck the tailbone either. We want the low back long. And then I want you to make a sound like you're saying shh, telling somebody to be quiet. Shh. And just notice where you feel that. Shh. And if you're not naturally feeling it, bring your awareness into your belly. If you don't want to be on all fours while you do this, you can lie back down on the ground and do it. So I'll show you that too. So positionally, I find that when we're going against gravity, it can help, but you can also do it here. So make a shh sound and see if you're feeling that tautness in the abdomen. Shh, like you're telling somebody to be quiet. So that's the TAs, the TVAs right there, right? We're feeling that drawing in. So the other thing to distinguish well, sometimes they do help us to stabilize the core, but to feel the differences now, you can come back to fours, you can stay where you are on the ground, make a sound like you're saying whoo, but and I want you to see where you feel that in your body. You can inhale through the nose and out the mouth. So recognize the shh too obviously was out the mouth, in the nose, out the mouth. So you're doing it either in all fours or you might be on your back, wherever you're comfortable for yourself. But what we're learning to distinguish here, as I put my head on my dog's bed, is when we're doing what you should feel is a little bit more of that pull in the area of the diaphragm, the roof of your four deep core. So we're actually getting into the oblique muscles. You might even feel your intercostal muscles between your ribs. Not usually one of the four deep core, although that's a whole discussion. But we're learning what feels like to stabilize from this area just by making that sound. If you're still on your hands and knees, maybe try it on your back. And then, so this is all a grow, try, experiential kind of video today. Take your hands to your belly and make that shh sound. And if it wasn't happening before, you can start to see how you can, just by with your awareness and this communication, you can make it happen, that shh sound. And I was just doing this with my partner, and when he first made this shh, he felt it in his chest. And sure enough, I said, just put your hands on your belly and try to make the shh from your belly, like you're drawing your abdomen in towards your kidneys or towards the front of your spine. And there it was. It turned back on. So now we know we've got that transversus abdominis going, TVAs. We've got these oblique muscles as well, and we can distinguish the two. That's really important. But also notice if you're making that shh, can you feel the pelvic floor moving? As I mentioned earlier, the pelvic floor and the TVAs are partners. So sometimes the one turns on before the other, but ultimately we want both of them to turn on. Okay, if you're on your back, we're going to come back. There's a lot of sit down, stand up. We might feel like we're at church today. I'm not sure. So it's the church of your body, of embodiment is what I like to think. So back to all fours. So now this is the famous position to get into your multifidus, but we're going to do it a little differently than what you normally see, which is what's called bird dog or spinal balance. So I want you to inhale, lengthen through the crown of your head, so you can get the base of the skull to the height of the sacrum. And then exhale, make that sound. Just tighten a little bit through the rib cage. And then next exhale, make the sh sound. So we don't need to go to 100%. We don't need to go even to 75%. But see if you can get that little bit of drawing up and in, that compression or contraction through both the ribs on the and the TVAs on the sh, and keep that. And here's the trick. I want you to keep breathing. If you're not, back on your back, do it there. So I'm going to show it that way too, because the idea is not to stop breathing. When you want to use these muscles to keep you upright, you're going to be breathing. You're going to be standing. So you could be here and do this. Take an inhale through the nose, and then see if you can stabilize around the rib cage. Take another inhale, and and can you even just keep 30% of that? So back off a little bit, and then redirect your breath to above the diaphragm. So here's the trick. This is getting a little bit deeper into it. So we want to breathe into the chest cavity now. You can even place your hands there. So what I'm feeling is a toning around the rib cage, the diaphragm, and the transverse abdominis, and actually for me, pelvic floor too. But it's a relaxed toning. I can still breathe to my chest. I'm still breathing, I'm still toning, all at the same time. And then I can take a big breath in. Oh, release the toning. Let it all go. We're going to do it one more time, but honestly, this exercise in itself is so powerful. Sometimes we refer to it as a bracing, but bracing to me makes it feel like you're taking it to 100% and practically causing harm or damage to your body. There's a softness. There's this breath in through the nose, and just to feel that little engagement through the ribs, and then another breath in through the nose, and the transverse abdominis, pelvic floor, and now I can feel. It's like we talk about the six-pack, right? The six-pack abs. It's actually more the rectus muscle. We don't want that. We want these deep inner core muscles. See if they're there, and can you just redirect your breath to the chest cavity above the diaphragm. That's learning that control, that muscle control, that communication. Not that we don't want to walk around like this. It's just learning to turn it on. And then take a big breath in and release it. All right, so one of the things you might find in doing this practice that we just did is that alone is going to help to release the chronically tight muscles in your back. So for instance, somebody I was just working with, it was the gluteal muscles in one butt cheek, just doing this. So sometimes just by waking up the postural muscles, those other guys that have been working overtime that are causing you pain and discomfort, those overworked muscles, will turn off. They'll say, hey, guess what? Somebody else stepped up to the plate. I can relax. So back to all fours one more time. Now we're going into multifidus truly, but I wanted to make sure we're finding that. So I'm going to walk you through again. Spread your fingers. Take a big breath in. We try to find, so if I were to take a rod and put it from the base of your skull to your sacrum, we want to find that line. And then take a little bit of a, and it's almost like you're lifting your rib cage slightly away from the ground, but I'm not rounding. I'm not going into that dog tail. I'm just lifting my rib cage. And then take a and feel a slight contraction through your abdomen, not hollowing out the abdomen. Again, not rounding. I'm keeping my pelvis in the same position. That's in a neutral position. Now, from here, I'm going to ask you to feel into your right leg, specifically your knee, without changing the shape of the pelvis or letting your hips shift to side. If we're stabilizing through the core, so we're not doing banana back, that's different. If we're not doing banana back and we're not doing dog tail or chicken butt, I'm sorry, I called it chicken butt last time. Either of those were neutral pelvis, that is your multifidus, particularly on your right side, and that's why I like this one. So you often see this as bird dog. We're going to do that too, but you're going to feel, notice if you can feel some activation. You can even, if you want, take a hand back there, but activation in that low back area specifically. And then let the right one go and try the left one. So if you've lost your shape, we do that a lot. Exhale, draw the ribs in. Exhale, draw the lower abdomen in. Imagine instead of tucking your tail, lengthen your tail and the crown of the head away from one another. The whole spine is what we call an axial extension. It's long. And then lift up just the left knee. So switching sides. Hi, Bodhi. Nice of you to wake up. You're lifting up just that left knee. And this is not a competition to see how high we can get it. It doesn't take much to get that multifidus to activate. You're just seeing, can you feel that? And was it easier? So this is a great way to assess yourself too, because oftentimes in this leg movement, and you can even do side to side now, you might notice that one side is easier to pick up than the other, or perhaps with one side we're finding that we're doing all this crazy stuff like lifting the left hip, you might shift all the way over. And so that's, that's ways that we're compromising the movement, right? When we do that kind of stuff, we're letting the hips fall. So if you have your pain, like I said, if pain is in one side of your back, studies show that that's the side that the multifidus will be inhibited or turned off. The second half of this practice is about once we know that the multifidus is turning on for us and the 4D core in general, we can go a little bit more into some postures of strengthening. So the first thing we're going to start with is coming down on our side body on the left side. If you feel like you want a pillow under your head, please feel free to grab that. You're going to stack your knees, let your head rest on your arm or on a pillow. Let yourself fall in, back down on the ground. The ground's there to support you. And then feel your right rib cage on the top there. Imagine the space from the hip to your armpit. Take a breath into your right lung. And as you do that, stretch your right arm slightly overhead and stretch the shoulder away from the hip. So what we're going to create here is a lateral bend through the spine. So you'll sense how as your right side lifts up towards the sky, the left side lifts away from the floor, and exhale back down. So what's happening here is we're lifting and lengthening the muscles on the right side of the spine, the multifidus, and we're shortening the sides in the left side, the muscles on the left side. Take a few of those. So this again is a more organic somatic movement. We want to make sure that in this side bend or lateral bend, we've got those muscles working. And then the other way to do this, because I always like to point out that in somatics, it's about finding the greatest range of motion with the most comfort or most pleasure. We can make the same movement thinking about the bottom half of the body, so the left side from the armpit to the waist. And now as you exhale, imagine lifting the left side off the ground. So the right side will still rise. And then inhale, release. So it's the movement, the initiation is coming from the bottom of the waist. And I like using the ground for this because what I'll sometimes see is we're pushing forward. We're going into that arch. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the neutral spine, right? That long, low back. And the other thing is, if we're going to do it on an exhale, lift that left waist, shorten the space from the armpit to the hip, that's going to give us the opportunity to also feel the pelvic floor and the TVAs turn on. So you're exhaling and feel that stability from the base of the spine, the lower abdomen, and that left side. So we're shortening and engaging the multifidus in the left side. And inhale, release. I find this is a really good one for scoliosis too, which scoliosis is definitely a case of the multifidus are off balance. One is usually inhibited or turned off, and the other side is doing all the work. So you can do it that way. And then so we're going to kind of, again, switch gears, go into a little bit more strengthening. If that feels okay, if you're not in active back pain, then we're going to come up onto the left forearm. Take your knees back so that your body is in a straight position. So if I were to run a pole from my forehead to my knees, run straight down. Now you can do that same exhale and lift that left hip off the ground. So you're really putting a little bit more into what the multifidus has to do, right? A little more force. You're lifting away from gravity on the exhale. But I like to make sure that I'm also recruiting the pelvic floor and the transversus abdominis. Thus, I do it on an exhalation. So the power of 3 of all those muscles working together. Inhale anytime, release. And exhale, lift up. The other thing you want to watch when we're doing this, so this is kind of a version of a forearm side plank, is you're not dropping that right shoulder forward, because then your spine is in rotation. So stack the right shoulder right over the left, or think of taking your right shoulder blade back. Base of the skull is in line with the sacrum. We're not in the head forward position. All that body mapping we just talked about. And you can even see if you can sustain it for a few breaths. Reach back there. See if you can feel that little ropey ridge on the left side of your back. And then come down. Let's try the other side. Coming on to the opposite side. And I'm going to come down first. This is the ooey gooey part, letting yourself relax. Use a pillow under your head if you'd rather. You can just stack your knees. Long spine, neutral pelvis. Take an inhale into your left rib cage and think of lifting it up towards the sky. So the movement's starting from the torso. I'm cautious not to think of just stretching my arm. This is just my arm stretching. I want to feel the low waist lifting, right? Or the upper waist lifting. We're working from the upper waist. And then exhale back down. So as you breathe in, think of the left hip and armpit going away from one another, stretching away. There's tension put on the skin. Feel the skin stretching. Exhale, drop down. And take a few of these using the breath. So you're using that breathing into your left lung and rib cage to lift you up. And then the right waist will lift too. So the right waist is shortening. The left waist is lengthening. And releasing down. So if that's feeling pretty good, let's go on and add the other muscles. So instead of lifting on an inhale, I just switch it and lift on an exhale, and I lift from my lower body. So think of the right hip to armpit. And as you exhale, lift that right waist off the ground. Inhale, release back down. And in doing so, see if on the exhale, you can find that pelvic floor lifting up and in the transverse abdominis. Notice how much more support you feel if you're able to get all three of those muscles working together, that trifecta. So we've got the multifidus in the lower right side of the back, actually the whole spine, and then releasing down, but it's supported by the lower abdominal muscles, the deep core, and your pelvic floor. So if we know we've got that going on and it feels pretty good, come onto your forearm. This version of forearm plank is terrific. So elbow underneath the shoulder. You need to stack your knees, and we don't want them out in front of us. Draw them back so your front body is in a straight line. Roll that left shoulder back. And then on an exhalation, just try to lift the waist off the floor. Compensation I see a lot is the waist will go back here. So you really want to keep the hips in line with the thighs and the shoulders, even if you just barely lift, right? And then inhale, come down. See if you can recruit. If it's not happening naturally, then we have to voluntarily ask pelvic floor and transverse abdominis to help lift us up on the exhale. So everything's kind of getting vacuumed up and in. And then inhale, release. So now we're getting that right side of the multifidus. I tend to do a head forward, so watch that the skull's staying back a little bit. Remember, your brain is reading the position of your neck as well. And relax. Okay, so that's our side lying. That was more of the lateral bend. We're going to go into a movement now that will we'll be using both sides of the multifidus simultaneously. So I'm going to have you take either a block. You can use a pillow, something that can go underneath you. And while I'm still up, I'm going to show that the position is more right by the hips here. So you're going to know you're going to come down onto the ground. And I use a block. It's a little bit more firm, but it feels good to me. So if the block is too far down my thighs, then when I drop onto my forearms, my back goes in. You can see my back, right? It's in that banana back or that chicken butt. So my low back is arched and short. Don't want that. On the other side of things, if the block is too far up, then my tailbone is going to fall, and I'm almost in that dog tail. I'm tucking my tailbone under. So you want it kind of right below the navel center across the wide part of the pelvis. Then we're going to come onto the forearms. So the idea here is that we're more likely to recruit multifidus instead of what we call the spinal extensors if we keep the low back long. And it likes the challenge of gravity. So on an exhalation, just slightly press into your arms, so we don't want to collapse into the shoulders, and lift off the block. Inhale, come back down. Exhale, lift off the block. So my first focus was on multifidus. That's what this video is about. But I'm also very aware that as I'm lifting up, I'm also engaging pelvic floor and the TVAs. Inhale, drop down, release. Exhale, lift up. And so often, so this is a forearm plank, I see this one done, and what happens is people are hanging. I can't do it with the block there, but they're hanging in their low back. So we really want to keep those kidneys puffed up, especially if you decide to extend your legs. If you're a person that does that pose all the time, make sure that you're keeping it honest. You're keeping that spine in a neutral position. And if just doing that lift up on the exhale and dropping down is a great way to go in and out. That to me is more intuitive. We're not locking the muscles on. We're asking them to turn on and off. But if you want to hold it to build strength, then feel free to hold up and keep your knees on the ground or press through your heels. Just watch we're not collapsing or dogtailing it. This is what the dogtail looks like. Our butt is way up here. So if that's the case, just stay on your knees. Okay, so that's another way to look at forearm plank to help strengthen the multifidus. The next one we're going to do is, again, from the yoga series, the boat pose or Navasana. And I love doing this one for multifidus. Most people don't look at it as a pose for the multifidus. I absolutely do, if done right. So boat pose, I'm going to come to the sit bones, and you're going to draw your ankles in a little bit. So what we see right away when this happens is we go into dogtail, missing the point. So what I'm going to have you do is if you've got the block or pillow, put it between a ball works too, put it between your thighs. This is going to help to engage the pelvic floor and the TVAs. Squeeze that block, grab a hold of your shins, and then take an inhalation. And instead of going back towards your buttocks, try to rock forward onto your sit bones. So we're trying to take that spine more into almost like coming into the chicken butt. We're not going to be in chicken butt, but we don't want to be in dogtail, right? So lengthen up through the crown of the head. And then we're just going to sit here. We're already working some muscles. Squeeze the block a little bit. And notice how on the exhalation, if you squeeze the block more, can you feel how that's going to help to engage pelvic floor and transversus abdominis? So exhale, squeeze in. Inhale, release. Now let's say we want to get a little bit more into the back and spine muscles. You can continue to hold your shins, push your feet into the ground. We don't want them to lift up. And just drop your shoulders back a little bit. So I'm dropping the whole spine in this position versus rounding. I'm not doing this. I'm just slightly dropping back. And then I get a little bit, it's asking a little bit more of those muscles. But we can make this movement based, more of a somatic movement. So you can either come forward and drop back, and I drop back on the exhale because that's requiring more of the deep core muscles. But if it feels okay, you can even let go of your shins. By the way, if you're sinking into your back, take your hands back here and lift yourself up for a moment or take a break. But if you're here and you're staying stable and long through your spine, try this one. This is really going to get into those back muscles. If you're in active back pain, you don't want to go here. And then take the hands back down. So instead of letting the back fall as I raise the spine, as I raise the arms, I'm doing just the opposite. I'm going to keep my spine in that position and lift up. That's my exhale, actually. Come back down on the inhale. Exhale, draw in through pelvic floor and transversus abdominis. Inhale, come back down. You can hold that one. So often I see people in that pose and they want to get their feet off the ground. Well, that's great, but not if you're here. So just keep your feet on the ground, right? This is a great way to strengthen all the muscles in the back and spine. Well, we'll go on to the next one. So after the boat pose, we're going to do one more lying down, coming down onto the back. And you're going to take the block between your knees or pillow, whatever you got there. Same function of squeezing the block. You might need to give those adductor muscles in your inner thighs a little break, but squeeze it because it's going to help to turn on pelvic floor and transversus abdominis. Take your arms out to your sides to 90 degrees. Relax the shoulders, relax the hips. So the key with this one is keeping, again, the pelvis, it's all the same. Keep the pelvis in this neutral position. So we don't want to arch the back. We don't want to curl the tailbone. Keeping it in a neutral position, lift your legs up to 90 degrees. Squeeze that block on the exhale particularly, and notice how you can find the function of pelvic floor and transversus abdominis. All we're going to do is a teeny tiny movement. On exhalation, drop the legs slightly to the left. Inhale back to center, release pelvic floor, release transversus abdominis. Exhale, drop to the right. And you'll notice I'm barely dropping. I don't want to drop so far that my hips are lifting off the ground and I'm actually rotating through the side body, although the multifidus are rotators, remember that. All it takes is a little bit of a drop on exhale. Inhale to center. So just explore. Can you feel those back muscles? And if the muscles that are those fast twitch are tightening up on you in your low back, then you know this one's not for you right now. Sorry. It's the truth. But just little rocking. You've got to, if it's working right, this is actually going to give some of those muscles position to relax, the permission to relax. Right? We're feeling ourselves supported from those deep core muscles. And just play with going side to side. Feel free to take your feet down at any time and relax. Exhaling and dropping. Inhale to center. As smooth as you can go. Here's that diaphragm talking to you. Take a few more. And then we'll take him back down. So that went back to working one side and the other. We are going to finish with the most common pose you always see for multifidus. I never know why, because there's so many fun ones. But it does take you back to a place of stabilizing through both sides. And we may be ready for it now. So come back to all fours. Spread your fingers, your thumb and index as wide as your outer shoulders, knees underneath the hips. And we want to tone by lifting up the rib cage a little bit. You can do that on the exhale. You can do your shh and tone through your abdomen. So not hollow out, but tone the abdomen. So find all that first. So remember, last time I had you in this position, we just were doing our little knee lifts, right? And that is a great one to stick with because you know you're using multifidus and you're not compensating by letting the hips drop. But if everything else seems to be going okay, then we can go into bird dog, or sometimes called spinal balance. So draw up, take the right foot back, and press through the ball of the foot. We just start there. That might be more than enough because if you've already shifted your hips to the left, you know you're not there. Or if you drop into that duck butt or chicken butt, you got to keep it lifted. So long back. You also don't want to tuck your tailbone. Now, if you're staying there, maintaining, maybe the weight goes in the right hand. And what I usually teach is just come on to the left fingertips first. Still feels good, then try extending that left hand. You'll get more into the upper back muscles. So this one does take you more into that upper back, the thoracic spine. If it's still feeling good, and what I like to do is actually take my hand down first, then go ahead and lift the leg. But there's not an external rotation of the hip. The pelvis is staying where it is. It's just a little lift in the leg. You can pull the top of the foot towards your shins, so you're flexing, you're dorsiflexing your foot. If that's all good, then we do both arm and leg. But typically when somebody goes here, they're in the banana back, they're lifting a hip, they're shifting. So you got to make sure you're not compensating or you're not doing yourself any favors. And then take it back down. Relax. Let's try the other side. As you exhale, draw up through the rib cage. Next exhalation, draw up through the navel center. So you might be making your noises, your shh, right, and your and then take the left leg back. Press through the ball of the foot. That's going to help to engage the thigh muscles too, so we can get those on. Keep the foot on the ground. That's going to keep the pelvis squared off. And if it's there, come on to just the right fingertips first. Watch that you don't collapse. Reach the hand forward if it's available. And when we reach the hand forward, you're going to point your thumb up and plug your arm bone into the shoulder blade. That's what's going to help to get the muscles in the upper back. We're not just reaching and disconnecting. Plug in. And then maybe take the hand back down. Try lifting the leg up. Now you're going to get those glutes firing in your hamstrings as well, but not at the expense of dropping to one side or going into the banana back. Keep that tailbone reaching back and the crown of the head forward, and maybe the arm comes in too. And then you got to focus on your breathing. And take it down. Before we end this video, I wanted to have you stand up, so come on and stand, and make what we just learned a little bit more functional. So the 4 deep core muscles, a reminder, are stabilizing muscles, and they're about anticipating movement. So come onto your feet and just let your weight shift from side to side and front to back. And notice what you feel through the diaphragm, the low abdomen, the pelvic floor, and even in your back and spine. You're just shifting your weight. Let your toes open up and take them back down. So these muscles, particularly multifidus, have a high number of what we call muscle spindles, which are sensory receptors on the muscles. And what these muscle spindles do is tell us where we are in space. So it's called proprioception. So you might even start to walk for a moment and notice what you feel. Is there any movement? But specifically, we can actually palpate and check our multifidus muscles. So in the walking, you can place your hands on either side of the low back, just come out just about an inch away from the spine, and take some small steps around and see if you feel like a ropey ridge coming up underneath your fingers. And it'll be one side and then the other. So we don't want either side to lock on. They should come on and off as we're walking. So that is the multifidus. And notice we're now no longer asking them to come on. Right? This is a voluntary on and off. They're anticipating our steps. They're very intuitive. So that's all good if you can feel that now. Maybe we wouldn't have before the video. So that's multifidus, being able to feel it. But we can also do the same with the other 4 deep core muscles. Diaphragm itself is just the idea that now we're standing. Can you do that full breath and feel your rib cage move? And we're going to need that to find the other two. So first come into a standing position here. We'll be still for a moment and just bop your heels on the floor. That helps to relax your legs. Let your legs relax, soft bend in the knees. And we want to check that that pelvis is in the neutral position, just like when we were down before. We don't want to be in the chicken butt, and we don't want to be in the dog tail. This is all part of what we call body mapping. Take a big breath in, and then just sigh and let the shoulders relax. So what we know about the deep core muscles is that we can't force postural tone. You know, throwing the shoulders back and the head back, this is not reliable. This is not sustainable. So we let ourselves almost fall into those muscles. And then now that we're there, go back to the diaphragmatic breathing and feel yourself from your pelvic floor. We're going to go down to the basement, the foundation of our house. Next time you take a breath in, take a full deep breath in. And as you breathe out, imagine stopping your urine, your pee in midstream. We're going to get a little grotesque here. And notice if you feel a lifting in the pelvic floor. Breathe in and imagine you're over the toilet. You get to let it go. Breathe out. Stop that pee in midstream. So you can even do this when you're walking. Breathe in. Feel the stretch through the pelvic floor. Breathe out, stop the pee in midstream. You could do it and feel your multifidus if you want, but that's a lot. Let's juggle one ball at a time. So can we walk and sense the way that these muscles are organically working for us? So we're working from the front of the pelvic floor. Let's go back to a still position and find the back of the pelvic floor. So now you're going to breathe in, soft knees. As you breathe out, imagine you got to go poop. And you got to hold it. So you're going to squeeze and feel the back of the pelvic floor. What often happens with this one is we'll recruit the glutes. So if you feel yourself squeezing the glutes, sometimes it's only one side, you know there's something going on there because those are muscles of movement. Those are fast twitch. We should be able to relax the glutes when we're standing still and just feel the back of the pelvic floor lift up and in on the exhale like you're stopping the poop. And then breathe in, release, and take your dump. Breathe out, draw in. So once we find the front and the back, you can do both. Take a breath in, take a breath out, stop the pee in midstream and the poop, and you're getting that whole pelvic floor action on the exhale. Release it on the inhale, very important, so finding that rhythm. Try walking again and see if you can feel the rhythm of the whole pelvic floor with your breath. So we've now put diaphragm together with multifidus and pelvic floor. If you're keeping track, keeping count, we've got one more, right? Transversus abdominis. That generally will ride along with the pelvic floor. If it's not, place your hands on the abdomen. Let's see if we can get that to go too. So breathe in. And as you breathe out, just that slight toning of the abdomen. Think of taking your two hip points, your pubis and your navel center, and just slightly drawing them in, almost like a cinch sack, right? You're drawing them in. Breathe in and release. Breathe out, draw in. So if we can feel it still, then walk for a moment. I'm going to take my hands. I like to feel all of them working together. So I've got that feeling of multifidus in my back, the feeling of pelvic floor, and you can walk all around. I'm staying on camera. And the feeling of transversus abdominis, diaphragm, of course. So how they're all integrating and working together now that we're standing. And this is really important because, as I said in the beginning, we can't take a reductionist philosophy when we're working with these deep core muscles. And more importantly, movement is about a perception of ourself. So that's this whole body mapping thing. And so you can keep walking around as I'm talking and feel it all. So now that you're familiarizing yourself with these muscles, make it functional and understand that the perception of ourself can get kind of screwed up if we've had pain, an injury, if we have things like depression or disease. And the more we allow ourselves to familiarize the brain with these deep core muscles, then we can make it functional. We can start to feel it, feel your heel strike. Your feet are really important, the brains of the spine. And when you feel your heel strike, there's a whole thing that goes on with pelvic floor and all the rest. And can you sense that? So I just wanted to make it a little more functional for you. Like I said, we're going to go back down onto the ground, but take a moment after this video, take many moments, walk around and see if you have a new awareness. For a final little somatic movement of rest and relaxation, please feel free to take your feet to the floor, knees bent, land and locate, let the back and spine relax. Notice how you're breathing, probably a little bit more refreshing. And then we're going to put some of those movements together using the floor to help to ground and heal and feel ourselves. So in the very beginning, we did that curl on the exhalation to draw in through pelvic floor and transversus abdominis. I've said that a lot in this video, right? You're going to continue to do that, exhaling into that, and you can inhale into the arch. So we're finding the movement of the pelvis back and forth, right? We kept it in that neutral position. Now let it go to its end point in the arch and end point in the curl. And typically we go to end point in the arch on the inhale, fill the belly, stretch the pelvic floor, end point on the curl on the exhale. Think of how you're creating this movement. Is it by pushing into or pulling away from the ground? So everything is relative to the ground, how we're creating force. So we find that this is our clock face, our pelvic circles. Think of your tailbone area pressing down as your 12 o'clock and your ribs and your low back as your 6 o'clock. Once we find that, we add our 3 and our 9. So you can put your hands on the front of the hip bones again, those ASIS points, and lift your left hip or feel yourself roll through your sacrum, weight going into the right hip, and then release down. And then opposite side. You can lift on the inhale or exhale. It won't matter when we're circling. And then release down. What you do want to watch for is that you're not pushing into your foot and using your leg so much to lift your hip. See if you can keep your legs relaxed. If they're not, take them out, shake them out, put them back. And see if you can just do slight little hip lifts and back down. It's really about lifting the hips. So one side and the other. That's bringing us back into that multifidus again, the rotational movement that it helps us with, particularly in the low back. We can add the upper back a little bit more by whichever hip is lifting. So I'm going to lift my left side, press that left shoulder blade into the ground. You might find your head wants to turn, and then release, and then lifting right hip, press the right shoulder blade into the ground. So feel those muscles tighten on the right side. Release, tighten the muscles on the left side of the spine, lifting left shoulder blade, pressing into left shoulder blade, lifting left hip. And side to side. And then once we found the hip lifts and the tilt, put it all together more intuitively, more playful. Just let your pelvis roll around in circles. Go through that 12 o'clock, the 3, the 6, and the 9. Lovely movement for the low back. And then I like to add the upper back and spine, so pressing into shoulder blades, letting the head and neck flow around in circles. Very exploratory. Think of the two ends of your torso, your tailbone and your tongue, just kind of playing with each other, and as they play, everything in between moves. Come to your still point, whatever leg position suits you, legs long or bent with knees falling together. Let's come back to just breathing to the diaphragm. We'll finish where we began. Notice any sensations here as you rest. The sensations of movement in your torso, particularly around your diaphragm and the rib cage, the low abdomen, the pelvic floor. And even movement through the connection of your back on the ground. Just that awareness. Just offer your body some gratitude for the way that those postural muscles will naturally support you, little or no effort. But right now there's no effort, just relaxation, appreciation. Thank you for joining me. Peace, joy, love, and light.